Growing up, I always felt like the odd one out in my own family. My parents never really seemed to want me around, and I guess I can't say I blame them. I was a surprise they weren't prepared for. Let me take you back a few years before I was born. My mom, Emily, and my dad, Alex, were the golden couple of their high school. You know the type. The ones everyone thought would go on to have a fairy tale life. They were the classic high school sweethearts, and even after graduation, they stuck together through college. They had big dreams of traveling the world, seeing new places, and making unforgettable memories. They wanted to eat street food in bustling cities, explore ancient ruins, and backpack through hidden trails. But then everything changed. Halfway through their college years, my mom found out she was pregnant with me. They were young, still deep in study mode, and completely unprepared for parenthood. At first, they leaned toward not having the baby. They were terrified of what it would mean for their future. But my grandparents, their parents, were absolutely against that idea. They pushed hard for them to have me, saying that every life was a blessing and that I deserved a chance. And so they kept me. But that didn't mean they were happy about it. My mom dropped out of college soon after. She couldn't stand the whispers, the stares, and the judgments from people who used to envy her. Meanwhile, my dad powered through, determined to finish his degree. But the tension between them was clear even before I was born. My entrance into the world was less of a celebration and more of a complication they didn't know how to handle. From the moment I arrived, my grandparents became my main caregivers. They were the ones who held me, fed me, and showed me what it felt like to be loved. I spent so much time with them that I actually thought my mom was my older sister. I didn't even realize she was my mother until much later because she was always somewhere else, doing her own thing and ignoring me. And my dad? He was just a name, a person I knew existed, but who might as well have been a character from a distant fairy tale because I never saw him. Despite everything, my parents stayed together. Maybe it was out of stubbornness, or maybe they thought that having me would eventually make things better. But it didn't. I was always just there. An unplanned kid who disrupted their perfect story. Looking back, I understand why they were the way they were. They were young, they had dreams, and I came along and flipped their lives upside down. But knowing that didn't make it any easier. It didn't change the fact that I felt more like a burden than a part of their family. The invisible wall between us just kept getting higher and higher, and I had no idea how to tear it down. My grandparents were my refuge. They were the ones who treated me like I mattered. My dad's parents would come over every weekend and spoil me with sweets and toys. My mom's parents took care of me full-time, even when I started going to school. I was happier with them than I ever was with my own parents. By the time my dad graduated and got his degree, I was already toddling around, starting to talk and recognize people. It was only then that he seemed to realize he had a child. He started visiting on weekends, showing up with small gifts, or just to sit and watch me play. At first, I didn't even know who he was. I just thought he was another friend of my grandparents. Mom didn't like his sudden interest in me. She'd complain and tell him that it was better to just stay out of my life. But my grandparents encouraged him to try, and he listened. Slowly, I started to see him more regularly, and that's when I began to understand that this man, this stranger, was my father. After he got a job, things moved quickly. He proposed to my mom, and they decided to make it official. They got a small place of their own and, for the first time, started talking about having a real family. Dad wanted me to move in with them so we could be a complete unit. Mom didn't want that at all. She argued, saying it would be better if I stayed with my grandparents since I was already settled and happy there. But my grandparents pushed back, saying it was time for my parents to take responsibility for me. At the age of 5, I moved in with my mom and dad. It was awful. Leaving my grandparents' home felt like being ripped out of a warm, safe bubble and dropped into a world that was cold and hostile. My mom made it clear from day one that I was not welcome. Every time I made a mistake or stepped out of line, she'd snap at me, reminding me that I should be grateful just to be living under their roof. If I didn't follow her rules perfectly, she'd threaten to send me back to my grandparents. My dad wasn't much better. He'd go to work early in the morning and come back late at night. On the rare occasions I tried to spend time with him, he'd brush me off, saying he was too tired. So I stayed out of their way as much as I could. I kept my head down, did my homework alone, and stayed quiet. It was like living with strangers who barely tolerated my existence. Things were different when I was with my grandparents. With them, I felt loved and valued. But at home, I was just there. I didn't understand why my parents didn't love me the way other kids' parents seemed to love them. I saw how my classmates' moms and dads would dote on them, hug them, and cheer them on at school events. And I'd stand off to the side, wondering what I'd done wrong to deserve the cold shoulders and harsh words. My grandparents tried to explain it to me. They said my parents were still figuring things out, that they hadn't learned how to be adults yet. But that didn't make the sting of my mom's hurtful comments any less sharp. She'd criticize everything about me, my hair, my clothes, even my weight. She once told me that if we'd been in school together, she would have bullied me. That's the kind of stuff no child should ever hear from their own mother. But I kept trying. I thought maybe if I was good enough, quiet enough, perfect enough, she'd start to love me. Maybe if I got perfect grades, she'd look at me with pride instead of disdain. So I threw myself into school, pushing myself to be the best at everything, hoping that somehow I could earn her approval. But it never came. Instead, I just got more criticism. If I didn't finish my homework, she'd call me lazy. If I did it too quickly, she'd accuse me of not trying hard enough. I was trapped in a no-win situation, and the stress started to build up inside me until it felt like I was going to burst. But then something happened that changed everything. I've always had a milk allergy, something my grandparents knew about and took seriously. But my mom refused to believe it. She thought I was just being dramatic. One day, when I was 8, she forced me to drink a glass of milk, saying I needed to toughen up. I ended up in the hospital. That was the first time I saw my dad stand up to her. He was furious, yelling at her in a way I'd never seen before. I was too sick to really understand what was happening, but I remember the fear in my mom's eyes. It was like a switch had flipped, and suddenly, for the first time, they saw me as more than just a nuisance. That incident changed everything. After that trip to the hospital, everything shifted. I don't know if it was because of the police showing up and warning my mom about negligence, or if it was the guilt finally catching up with her, but for the first time, she started acting differently. The strict, dismissive tone was still there, but she actually started to take part in my daily routine. She'd wake me up for school, help me get dressed, and even make sure I had lunch packed. It wasn't exactly the motherly warmth I'd been craving, but it was something. And I clung to that something like a lifeline. My dad changed too. He started making time to talk to me in the evenings, even if it was just a few minutes to ask how my day went. He would sit with me at the dinner table instead of retreating to his room the moment he got home. Some nights, he'd even read me a story before I went to bed. For a long time, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for things to go back to how they were. But the more they tried, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, they were finally starting to see me as their daughter. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't perfect. Far from it. There were still fights and awkward silences, and I still felt like an outsider more often than not. But those small moments of attention and effort slowly started to thaw the icy walls between us. I started seeing glimpses of the parents I always wished I'd had. Parents who cared, who wanted to be part of my life. It was a strange, tentative peace, one I didn't quite know how to handle. But as the months passed, we slowly began building something that resembled a real family. By the time I turned 12, I'd gotten used to the new rhythm of our household. It wasn't perfect, but at least I wasn't terrified of coming home anymore. And then, that summer, something amazing happened. One afternoon, I found an old crochet kit buried in the back of a closet at my grandparents' place. It belonged to my grandma. She used to be a master crocheter, creating beautiful pieces that she sold at local craft fairs. When she saw me holding that kit, her eyes lit up with a joy I'd rarely seen before. She offered to teach me, and I jumped at the chance. At first I struggled. My clumsy fingers fumbled with the yarn, and the stitches were uneven and messy. But my grandma was patient. She sat beside me for hours, guiding me through each step, encouraging me when I got frustrated. Slowly, I started to get the hang of it. And soon enough, I was making scarves and small decorations that didn't look half-dash bad. Crocheting became my escape. Every stitch felt like a tiny act of creation, a way to pour all the emotions I couldn't express into something tangible. I'd spend hours working on new designs, experimenting with colors and textures. My grandma would sit beside me, offering tips and sharing stories of the fairs she used to sell at. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose. When I turned 15, I decided to try something bold. Inspired by my grandma's stories, I set up a small booth at the local craft fair, just like she used to. I laid out my pieces, scarves, beanies, small toys, and waited nervously to see if anyone would even glance my way. To my shock, people loved my work. It was like a dream. Customers came up, complimented my designs, and even placed custom orders. By the end of the day, I'd sold out of nearly everything. That was the moment I realized that this little hobby could be something more. It wasn't just about the money, though that part was pretty great too. It was about the sense of accomplishment of creating something beautiful and sharing it with others. It felt like a way to connect with my grandma's legacy while also building something that was entirely my own. With her support, I started taking on more orders. Soon I was making a decent amount of cash on the side, enough to start saving up for college. My grandma suggested opening a savings account, and I eagerly agreed. I thought my parents would be proud of me, that they'd see how hard I was working and how serious I was about my future. But I couldn't have been more wrong. When I finally told them about my little business, about the money I'd made and the plans I had for college, their reaction was the exact opposite of what I'd hoped for. Instead of being proud, they were furious. Crocheting? My dad sneered. You think that's going to get you anywhere? I've been busting my back to put food on the table and you're wasting your time on this? I tried to explain, tried to show him the savings I'd built up and the custom orders I was getting, but it only seemed to make things worse. My mom's face turned red with anger. You think you're too good for what we're giving you? She snapped. You think you can just run off and do your own thing? She demanded that I hand over my earnings, saying it was their right to take it since I was still living under their roof. When I refused, my dad threatened to destroy all my supplies, to burn my yarn and smash the projects I'd worked so hard on. I was stunned. I'd never seen them like this, so angry, so determined to tear down the one thing I was proud of. It felt like a punch to the gut. But then, my grandma stepped in. She stood up to them, refusing to let them touch a single penny of what I'd earned. She told them that if they wanted to fight, they'd have to fight her too, because the money was in an account with her name on it. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my parents' eyes. They backed down, but the damage was done. It was like a curtain had been pulled back, revealing the truth of who they really were. They didn't care about my future. They just wanted control. They wanted me to stay under their thumb, to bend to their will. And the idea of me having something of my own, something that they couldn't take, drove them mad. That was the moment I knew I couldn't trust them. Not ever again. From then on, I kept my business a secret. I lied and said I'd given it up. But in reality, I was sneaking over to my grandma's house every weekend, working quietly on my orders and building my savings. I even started an Instagram account to showcase my designs and attract more customers. It was risky. My parents monitored my phone and tracked my location, so I had to be careful. But I didn't care. I refused to let them take away the one thing that made me feel like I had control over my own life. The more orders I got, the more I realized that I was good at this. Really good. People loved my work. And before long, I had a steady stream of clients placing custom orders for everything from blankets to intricate wall hangings. With my grandma's help, I expanded my business online, connecting with other artists and finding new ways to reach customers. But keeping up the facade at home was exhausting. My parents would barge into my room at random times, going through my things, demanding to know if I was still working on that stupid hobby. I had to keep my supplies hidden, my earnings tucked away in secret corners, and my online activities under strict privacy settings. I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. So I started planning my escape. When I turned 17, I applied for part-time jobs, telling my parents I needed work experience for college applications. They agreed, but demanded 30% of whatever I earned. I complied without complaint, giving them their cut while funneling the rest into my savings. Every week, I'd hand over a small stack of cash, smiling sweetly and pretending that I was just a dutiful daughter. But the day I turned 18, I was gone. I packed up everything I'd bought for myself and left behind anything they'd given me. I didn't want to take a single thing that tied me to them. Early that morning, my grandma picked me up and I moved in with her for good. My parents tried to stop me. They threatened, they shouted, they even tried to call the police, but it was too late. I was an adult now and they had no power over me anymore. For the first time in my life, I was free. Moving in with my grandma was like stepping into a new life, a life that was finally mine. There were no rules designed to control me, no constant surveillance, and most importantly, no toxic negativity. I could finally breathe without that suffocating weight of always being judged. The first thing I did was buy myself a new phone and get a fresh number. I wanted a clean break, and that meant cutting off any way for my parents to contact me. Next, I went to the bank with my grandma and officially transferred all the money I'd saved up into an account solely in my name. Holding that debit card in my hand felt like holding a symbol of my independence, something I'd fought so hard to secure. I also reactivated my Instagram account. I deactivated it months ago to keep my parents from snooping around, but now I was free to share my work again. My grandma even set up a small workspace in her home for me, a corner filled with shelves of colorful yarn, hooks, and fabric. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and that's all that mattered. For the first few weeks, things were quiet. My parents hadn't reached out, and I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally accepted that I was gone for good. But then I heard through the grapevine that they were celebrating. Celebrating. One of our relatives called to tell me that my parents had thrown a freedom party a week after I'd left. They'd invited all their friends and relatives, popping champagne and boasting about how they were finally free of the burden of parenthood. They were smiling, laughing, and taking pictures, all while telling people how much better their lives were without me. Hearing that hurt more than I care to admit. Even after everything they'd put me through, some small part of me had hoped they'd at least feel a pang of regret when I walked out of their lives. But no, instead they celebrated. That was the wake-up call I needed to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying around. They weren't grieving, they were rejoicing. I was just an inconvenience they'd finally gotten rid of. But the funny thing about family drama is that it doesn't stay hidden for long. My grandparents, my dad's parents, heard about the party and were absolutely livid. They'd been traveling for the past few years and were completely unaware of what had been going on between me and my parents. When they got the news, they immediately reached out wanting to know what had happened. It was awkward at first. I hadn't spoken to them in years, and I didn't know how much I should tell them. But they were insistent, so I finally laid it all out. The neglect, the emotional abuse, the way my parents tried to control me, and how they'd even tried to take the money I'd earned through my crocheting business. I told them about everything, and by the end of it, they were horrified. "Why didn't you call us sooner?" my grandpa asked, his voice tight with anger. "We would have come and gotten you." "I wasn't allowed to," I explained quietly. "They monitored my phone. They controlled everything." Hearing that seemed to break something in him. My grandparents apologized over and over for not being there, for not stepping in sooner. But it wasn't their fault. They'd been kept in the dark, just like everyone else. From that point on, they made it their mission to spread the word. They called every relative and family friend, telling them the real story, my story. And to my surprise, people listened. Old neighbors, distant cousins, even people I barely remembered started reaching out, offering their support. Some even tried to give me money, but I refused. I didn't need handouts. I just needed them to understand what I'd been through. Instead, I told them about my crocheting business and asked them to help me spread the word. And they did. Slowly but surely, orders started trickling in. People began reaching out to request custom pieces, scarves, blankets, even baby clothes. My little business, the one my parents had tried so hard to crush, was growing. And then, in the middle of all this, something incredible happened. I got into my dream college. Not just any college, the college I'd been dreaming about since I was a kid. And I got in on a full scholarship. When the acceptance letter came, I nearly cried. It felt like the universe was finally giving me a break, a chance to build the future I'd always wanted, free from the chaos of my past. My grandma and I celebrated quietly, just the two of us. She hugged me tight and told me how proud she was. My grandpa and grandma even offered to give me their old car, a beat-up sedan that needed a little work but was still running. I was overwhelmed by their generosity. With that car, I'd have the freedom to visit grandma on weekends and keep working on my business while attending college. As if that wasn't enough, my best friend Megan, who'd been with me through everything, reached out with an exciting proposition. She'd just started working at a local newspaper and thought my story could inspire other young people. "There aren't many teenage entrepreneurs around here," she said. "People need to hear about what you've done." At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I wanted to share my story publicly, especially knowing how it might reflect on my parents. But then I thought about all the kids out there who might be in a situation like mine, feeling trapped and alone. If telling my story could help even one person, then it would be worth it. I agreed. The article was published a few weeks later. Seeing my name in print, my story out there for everyone to see, felt surreal. It wasn't just about my business. It was about my journey, my fight for independence, and my determination to build a life for myself despite everything. People started reaching out, congratulating me, offering support, and placing even more orders. Of course, my parents found out. I should have known they would. It didn't take long for them to get wind of the article, and when they did, they lost their minds. They called my grandma, screaming about how I'd betrayed them, how I'd painted them as monsters to the whole world. They demanded I give them credit for supporting my business, claiming that since I'd started it while living under their roof, they deserved a cut of the profits. It was ridiculous, but they didn't care. They even threatened to take me to court. But my grandma shut them down. "Go ahead," she said coolly. "Everything she's done here with my help, and I'll testify to that. You have no claim over her success." I was furious. After everything they'd put me through, they were still trying to control me, still trying to take away what I'd built. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them exactly what I thought, but I knew that would only make things worse. So instead, I did the one thing I knew would drive them mad. I threw a party. It wasn't anything big, just a small gathering of friends and family to celebrate my acceptance into college and the success of my business. We laughed, ate cake, and toasted to the future. It was a night filled with love and support, the kind of night I'd never had growing up. Of course, word got back to my parents. They somehow got my new number and started blowing up my phone with hateful messages. They called me ungrateful, a traitor, a selfish daughter who'd turned her back on the people who'd sacrificed everything for her. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time, I felt free. Free to live my life, to follow my dreams, to build a future that was entirely mine. They could rage all they wanted. They could spread lies and throw tantrums, but it didn't matter. I wasn't their prisoner anymore. They were just voices on the other side of a door I'd finally closed for good. After I threw my small celebration party and shared the good news about my college acceptance, I decided it was time to take a stand. I couldn't keep dancing around my parents' drama, letting them poison every good thing in my life. I needed closure for my own peace of mind. So I sat down with my grandma and drafted an email, a final message to let my parents know exactly what I felt and why I was cutting them off. It took hours to put into words everything I'd been holding in for so long. But when I finally hit send, a weight lifted off my shoulders. The email wasn't just for them. It was for me. A way to say everything I'd been too scared to voice before. Dear Mom and Dad, I've spent my entire life trying to understand why you treated me the way you did. I grew up thinking that if I was good enough, quiet enough, or perfect enough, you'd finally see me, finally love me. But it never happened. And now, I'm done chasing a love that's never been there. I need you to know that I don't hate you. I don't wish you harm, but I can't let you keep hurting me. I won't let you take away what I've worked so hard to build. I won't let you undermine my happiness or use guilt and manipulation to make me feel small. I don't expect you to understand. I don't even expect a reply. I just want you to know that this is it. I'm cutting all contact. I'm building a life for myself. one that doesn't include the pain and the toxicity of our past. Thank you for showing me what I don't want to be. Thank you for pushing me to be stronger, braver, and more resilient than I ever thought I could be. I'm walking away now. For good. Please respect that. Goodbye. Ellie. After I hit send, I blocked them on every platform. No more calls, no more texts, no more screaming matches. It was like slamming the door on a chapter of my life that I never wanted to reopen. And then I turned my focus back to the future. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I packed up my things, got ready for the big move, and settled into my new dorm at college. It was a strange feeling, being surrounded by so many people, all of us starting a new chapter together. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed, unsure of how to navigate this new world. But I had my grandma, my friends, and my passion to keep me grounded. Even though I was juggling a full college schedule, I kept my crochet business running. I'd spend late nights working on orders, balancing yarn and textbooks, but I loved every second of it. Crocheting was more than just a business. It was my way of staying connected to my grandma and the life I was building. To my surprise, college life opened up even more opportunities. One of my new friends loved my designs and started wearing them around campus. Word spread quickly, and before I knew it, I had students coming up to me, asking for custom pieces. It was surreal. What started as a small hobby had turned into something much bigger, something that people really appreciated. Around that time, I met Kyle. Kyle was in my economics class, and we ended up paired together for a group project. At first, I kept my distance. I wasn't looking to date or make deep connections. I was still focused on finding my own footing. But Kyle was different. He was kind, patient, and most importantly, he respected my boundaries. He never pushed, never pried. He was just there, quietly supportive in a way I wasn't used to. After a few months, we started hanging out more outside of class. We'd grab coffee between lectures or go on long walks around campus, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, he came over to my dorm to help me with a particularly difficult order, a large, intricate blanket that required hours of work. He stayed with me until 2 a.m., just talking and laughing as we worked. That's when I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could let someone new into my life. Kyle and I have been dating for a few months now, and things are good, really good. I'm still cautious, still trying to find the balance between my independence and this new relationship. But he's been nothing but understanding. He cheers me on in everything I do and gives me space when I need it. For the first time, I'm experiencing what it's like to have someone who genuinely wants the best for me without trying to control me. As for my crocheting business, it's taken off in ways I never imagined. With the help of my friends, I set up a proper online store, and the orders have been flooding in. I even had to hire 2 part-time assistants to help manage shipping and customer inquiries. It's still a small operation, but I'm proud of it. Every sale, every happy review feels like another step forward, another piece of proof that I'm capable of building something real and lasting. But just when I thought my parents were out of the picture for good, I got some unexpected news. Apparently, the backlash from the article and the fallout with our extended family hit them harder than I realized. My dad's parents, who were still furious about everything, told me that my parents decided to sell everything and move out of the country. They didn't leave a forwarding address. They didn't reach out to me. They just disappeared. Part of me thought I'd feel relief, maybe even satisfaction, knowing they couldn't touch me anymore. But mostly, I just felt empty. They'd walked away without a single word, without ever acknowledging what they'd done. They chose their pride over their child. I guess I shouldn't have expected anything different. But I also realized something important. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their acknowledgement. Their actions had nothing to do with me anymore. I was free, truly free. And it was time to stop letting their shadow hang over my life. I made a decision. I decided to stop looking back and focus entirely on what's ahead. In the months since I sent that email, I've been thriving. I'm maintaining good grades in school, meeting new people, and finding my own way. My weekends are filled with work and laughter at my grandma's studio, where we continue to build our little crochet empire. And for the first time in forever, I'm starting to feel happy. It's not perfect. I still have moments where the past sneaks up on me, Moments when I wonder what might have been if things had turned out differently. But those moments are getting fewer and fewer. I'm surrounded by people who love and support me. People who see me for who I really am, not who they want me to be, and that's what matters, My parents may have moved away, but I'm staying right where I belong, with my grandma, my friends, and a future that's finally, completely my own. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who stand by you, who help you grow, who celebrate your successes and comfort you in your failures. It's about the bonds you choose to build, not the ones you're born into. I'll probably never have a normal relationship with my parents, but I'm okay with that, because I have a family that loves me. I have a future that I'm excited for, and for the first time in my life, I'm choosing to live it on my own terms. Thank you to everyone who's followed my story and offered words of encouragement. Your support means more to me than I can express. This will probably be my last update, because the truth is, I'm done looking back. I'm ready to move forward, to build a life that's free from the pain of my past. From now on, I'm focusing on the good, the love, the laughter, and the joy of building something beautiful from scratch. Goodbye, and thank you. Story 2. I got kicked out by Mom because I wouldn't give my step-sibling access to my college fund. At 17, I live with my mother. She is 43, her spouse, my stepfather, together with his 2 children, Ryan and Emma. Emma is 2 years younger than me, and Ryan is a year older. Although we all attend the same high school, that doesn't mean that we socialize or anything. We're acquainted with each other's friends, but that's all. Although my mom and stepdad have been living together for 6 years, they have only been married for 3. Ever since my mother made the decision that she truly loved him, I honestly believed that our time together would be spent as a large, happy family when we initially moved in. I thought I would have siblings by now and we would all hang out and do family activities, but that never really happened. To be honest, I ought to have anticipated this from the beginning, but perhaps I had too much hope, or perhaps I was simply unwilling to acknowledge that life wouldn't always be sunshine and rainbows. See, it was just me and her until my mom got together with my stepdad. When I was a small child, my dad died. Too little time to recall much about him. My mother has always been a little evasive about him, so that's all I know about him. She blamed his family's obstinacy for the reason they never married. They didn't get along. However, I'm not sure. I was too young to be privy to the actual events. Nevertheless, my dad established a college fund for me before he died away. Given how ill he was, I'm not sure how he did it, but he did. When I was old enough to comprehend, his lawyer told me about it. And I suppose that's been the one thing I've had on the back of my mind constantly. At least I have that, no matter what. It's configured so that neither my mother nor I can touch it until we become 18. Until then, it is under the lawyer's authority. Like I mentioned, for a very long time it was just my mom and myself. We were good after I adjusted to it. She was my whole universe. Our little apartment was little, but it was perfect for the 2 of us. However, things started to change when Mom got to know my stepdad when I was 8 years old. It moved slowly at first. She would take him out on dates, and I would stay at my grandparents' house. The parents of my mother, not that of my father. They have never appeared in the image. At the time, I thought she deserved to be happy, so I didn't mind too much. Then again, they became more somber. Things took a turn for the worst when my mom began discussing moving into his apartment. She would not stop talking about how wonderful he was and how his children were such good, kind children. She was ecstatic. She was often promising me that we would be a huge, happy family and that I would eventually have siblings. I can still recall my excitement because what child wouldn't desire that? I was making a lot of effort to be upbeat when we eventually moved into their house. Well, it was a significant shift. New location, new school. I also had 2 step-siblings and a stepdad to get used to. But if I just worked hard enough, I figured it would work out. I made an effort to engage with Ryan and Emma by asking them to watch movies or play video games. Occasionally, they would accept, but most of the time all they would do was give me blank glances and ask, "Why are you even here?" At first, I would dismiss it, telling myself they simply needed time to acclimate. They had a lot to deal with when a stranger moved into their home and they were informed she was going to be their new sister. However, months passed with little to no change. Although we shared a home, we weren't really a family. I had more of a roommate-like experience. Really, they didn't want. They weren't cruel or anything, but there was just a certain vibe, you know? I would be there while they sat around the table chatting with my mom and stepdad, but it didn't feel like I was. They would joke around about things from before I moved in, or laugh at inside jokes that I missed. And they would just sort of ignore me when I tried to join in, not in an antagonistic manner. The same way they didn't seem to mind whether I was present or not. Neither did my mother appear to notice. She didn't realize how I was being left out because she was so content with her new family. To be honest, it was strange to see her in that state. When we were the only two, she had never been happier. I made an effort to convince myself that it was a positive thing, that she was at last content, but I couldn't help but feel alienated. I eventually just stopped trying. Rather than attempting to hang out with them, I would go out with my own friends or stay in my room. It seemed like a wasted effort. I didn't have the energy to keep trying to tear down the imaginary wall that separated me from my stepdad and his children, even though they were quite courteous. It seemed as though I wasn't truly a part of their family. The worst thing about my mom, even if she was the way she handled things. She would go above and beyond to please them, such as preparing their favorite dishes, accompanying them shopping, or making sure their accommodations were ideal. I would get the leftovers in the meanwhile, both literally and symbolically. I thought there was no use in talking about it, so I kept quiet. It stung to see her care so much for them and not even acknowledge my feelings, even though it wasn't like it would make a difference. In my younger days, I used to assume that maybe if I worked more, they would consider me a member of the family. However, as I grew older, I understood that to be wishful thinking. It was never going to occur. I was standing outside looking in as they were with their friends. The problem is, I don't even believe they did it intentionally. It was the way things were. I still attempt to convince myself sometimes that I might be overanalyzing things, but I know in my heart that I'm not. It seems like I'm only a link to my mother's former life, even though she now has a new family. She seems to have moved on from our days together and is now more concerned with making her new family work. It's difficult to be the one left out, so I suppose I can't blame her for wanting to be happy. We moved in with them years ago, and I've come to terms with the fact that things will never work out the way I had hoped. I no longer attempt to fit in. Instead, I concentrate on doing my own thing. However, on some days, I still find it bothersome. Like when I'm sitting there feeling like I don't belong, and I watch my mom laughing with them. Maybe it's silly to still feel this way after all these years, but I don't know. Perhaps I should just move on from it. However, living in a house where you don't feel welcome might be difficult. I believe the only thing that keeps me going is the knowledge that I'll be able to leave this place once I graduate and turn 18, when I'll have my own money. Probably the only thing that gives me hope for a future free of them is the college fund my father gave me. Whenever things become really awful, I just give that some thought. Eventually, I hope to be able to move out, attend college, and lead a self-sufficient life without feeling alienated in my own house. Fine. Thus, when my stepdad's past resurfaced, things here became a little more genuine. It seems reasonable to clarify what I mean when I say that. You see, before he met my mom, my stepdad lived a whole different existence. I've heard that his marriage wasn't quite happy and he was married. This real piece of work was his ex-wife, essentially a gold digger, who took advantage of him for the full amount that he possessed. Initially, I was ignorant of all the specifics, but as time went on, I began to piece things together. It seems that she not only depleted his bank account, but also put him in a difficult situation with the children. My stepsister Emma and my stepbrother Ryan. My stepdad had to start everything over after the divorce because she abruptly left them. That's probably why he took a strong liking to my mom. She was the exact opposite of his former partner. Not a drama, merely being there for him, constantly doing her hardest to make things work. It seems sense that my stepdad and his children greeted her warmly. She was the answer to every issue they had. However, I was only serving as a reminder that she had lived a different life and that it wasn't part of their idyllic scenario. I felt like I was just the extra baggage that went with the ride, even though they clearly wanted my mom to be a part of their new family. To be honest, when we first moved in, I wasn't really paying attention to any of this. When I was younger, attempting to fit in at school and make new acquaintances took up most of my thoughts. However, as I grew older, I became aware of the little things, such as my mom and stepdad's conversations about their future plans, items such as travel, house renovations, and other standard expenses. But their children was always the center of attention. Those were never actually conversations with me. I felt as though I was there, but I wasn't. Even when I was physically present in the room, they would talk over or around me as if I weren't there. To be honest, I didn't realize how much it hurt. I continued trying to convince myself that it wasn't personal and that it was just the way things were. But with time, that became increasingly difficult. My mother, however, would never see it. She would appear to be in complete bliss, beaming with happiness. She would ramble on about how pleased she was and how fortunate she was to have found this amazing family. And all I would do was watch her play this role to which I was not invited. I used to wonder sometimes if she was acting. It's possible that she chose not to observe how they handled me. On other occasions, though, I got the impression that she was blissfully unaware of all that was happening. The main thing that bothered me was the disparity in the way my stepdad and his children treated my mom and me when we were together. They would make a special effort to involve her in everything. Emma would ask her to go shopping for clothes, and Ryan would ask her for help with school tasks. Like this ideal little family, they would all congregate in the living area and watch movies or make supper together. However, they would seldom speak to me. It seemed as though I would turn out the lights whenever I entered a room. The atmosphere would become weird, and everyone would just kind of become quiet. If I tried to join the conversation, it seemed like they wouldn't know what to do with me. They would kindly nod or respond with a single word till I could tell they had no interest. I eventually gave up trying to fit in. Instead of coming home after school, I would either remain up in my room or visit the library. Avoiding them was a simpler option than continuing to feel alienated within my own home. Not wanting to go home because it doesn't seem like home is a strange emotion. That's all it is, a place for me to eat and sleep. You may be wondering now, why didn't you talk to your mother? And believe me, I gave it a lot of thought. But each time I was about to bring it up, I recoiled. I had the impression that everything I said would only come across as needy or jealous, as if I couldn't bear for my mother to be content without me. I also didn't want to be that individual, the person who, unable to accept even a small amount of change, destroys everything. I said nothing, therefore. As I began to hear more tales about my stepdad's former wife, it grew worse. She was an absolute nightmare, based on what I've learned. Her actions not only depleted his finances, but also damaged his bond with their children. After she departed, my stepdad had to work 2 jobs to pay off debts and provide for Ryan and Emma. My mother then appeared, and she exclaimed, "This miracle who saved the day?" I believe that's the reason they were so devoted to her. Their fix was her. After years of hardship, I was merely an added bonus that they didn't request. It seems like my stepdad and his children didn't want to bother with me and my mom because they were so happy to have my mom in their lives. Her focus on being the ideal stepmother prevented her from noticing. I continued to try to persuade myself that there was yet hope. I would convince myself that perhaps I would just have to give it some time, that we would eventually get close, and that then it would truly seem like a family. However, as time went on, I became increasingly aware that it was not going to happen. The children of my stepdad had previously determined they didn't require a second sibling. My stepdad, on the other hand, was just content, so long as my mother was content. I once heard my stepfather in the kitchen having a conversation with his friend. He would not stop talking about how fortunate he was to have found my mom and how their relationship had entirely changed his life. He referred to her as the greatest thing that had ever occurred to him, and a gift. I recall listening to all of this praise while standing just out of sight. He was giving her a lot of attention, and I was waiting for him to say something about me, like how good it was to have me around too or something. However, he didn't. He never once mentioned me. That's when it really got to me. I came to the realization that I would never fit into their picture, no matter how hard I tried or what I did. My mother had made her decision, and I had no say in it. They seemed to have a wonderful family dynamic without me in it, and they were all quite content with that. I still recall leaving that conversation feeling as though I had taken a hit to the stomach. Being an outsider was one thing, but realizing that I was one was quite another. I didn't think about it. It wasn't all in my head. I was merely following along as they enjoyed their family. I began to distance myself even more after that. To avoid having to sit with them, I would either eat dinner later or come up with excuses to spend as little time in the house as possible. In that way, it was simpler. It was obvious that something wasn't right, so I didn't have to act like it was. I still felt compelled, though, to pretend that everything was fine in spite of all of that. They made my mom so happy, and I didn't want to ruin that for her. She seemed to have at last found what she was searching for. Who was I to spoil that anyway? I pretended that it didn't affect me as much as it did, and kept quiet and out of their way. However, it was becoming more difficult to deny the fact that I would never be a member of this family that my mother was so proud of. And no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that it was all right, the pain persisted. Okay, so this is when the bad news really starts to come in. As graduation approaches, I've been considering colleges for some time. My dad established a college fund for me, something I've always known about. Thus, money wasn't a big concern for me. I reasoned that I could travel almost any place I wanted with the fund. In addition, I've been putting a lot of effort into my studies and had a scholarship in mind. I had everything figured out pretty much. My mother summons me into the living room one evening, saying she needs to have a serious conversation. It's just the two of us, but I can tell by the way she's talking that this will be one of those family meetings. She pulls me up and begins to babble on about how much education costs these days and how, we're all related and need to help one another. At first, I didn't know where she was going with this, but then she drops the big one. She informs me that my stepdad is unable to put money aside for Ryan and Emma's college education, and she believes it would be just if I divided my college fund with them. I simply stared at her as if she were speaking a foreign tongue or something. I was taken aback. My dad put this money aside just for me to make sure I would be okay after he passed away. Since he died when I was a child, that's the only thing he could really offer me. And now, she was urging me to divide it with kids who, to be honest, don't even really like me. My face started to get hot, and I experienced a constriction in my chest. Although I knew she was waiting for me to say something, I was at a loss for words. She persisted, so I assumed she interpreted my quiet as me being receptive to the notion. She got to talking about how families take care of one another and that we all need to do the same. She also mentioned how much Ryan and Emma needed the assistance, as Ryan is currently applying to colleges after taking a year off. When I eventually calmed down, I told her no. Simply put, no. I informed her that my college fund was not intended for them. Thus, I would not be sharing it with them. It was my dad's money, and he was the one who put it up for me. Besides, why should I? They've never made me feel like a member of the family, and we're not particularly close. She took it quite poorly. This calmness left her face. I'm trying to be sensible. In 2 seconds or less, looked to complete rage. She said I wasn't thinking about the family and called me selfish. Even though I anticipated this response, it still hurt. Hey, she's my mother. And here she was, behaving as though I were a villain, merely out of my want to hold on to the one item my father left me. I told her that I could live with my selfishness. Since the money was ultimately meant just for me, I assured her I had no trouble admitting it. Ryan could take out loans like any other young person without a fund established for them if he truly wanted to go college that badly. I realized it sounded harsh, but I had had enough of being polite. That's when she went completely crazy. She became enraged. And not just any old yelling either. This was pure anger. She was ranting about how unappreciative I was, and how I didn't recognize the value of everything my stepdad and she had done for me. She claimed my dad would be very disappointed if he could see me now. That one really got to me, but I wasn't going to give up. Since I knew that arguing with her would not solve anything, I just sat there and let her shout. I attempted to clarify that honoring my dad's desires and looking after myself had nothing to do with being ungrateful. She wasn't hearing it, even though this fund was my ticket out of a circumstance that had made me feel alienated for years. She was too dramatic, stating things like, "You really think you're better than them? Additionally, you are self-centered." It was all I could do not to yell back. I was so irritated. How on earth could she not understand that? This was necessary for my own future. She is supposed to be my mother and my staunchest ally, and here she was, painting me in a negative light. I wouldn't give up what was rightfully mine. What was truly awful was that she continued to base her case on the whole family stuff. I mean, in my own house, all of them treating me like a stranger. Where was this family unity? I assured her that nothing would change if she yelled at me. "You may yell all you want, but it won't make me feel better about this," I said. To be honest, the money was no longer the main concern. That was the overall idea. She never treated me like one of their kind, so how could she expect me to give up something so important? After a while, she stopped screaming, and we were just staring at one another. She was clearly attempting to consider her next move, but I wasn't going to give her the opportunity. I got up and assured her that it was okay if this was the hill she chose to die on. She wasn't going to guilt-trip me into changing my views, and I wasn't going to back down. She then made a statement that truly confused me. She warned me that she wouldn't have an option if I didn't decide differently in a week. But to expel me, I recall being so taken aback by what I was hearing that I just stood there blinking. She made a serious threat to eject me because of this. She informed me that since it was almost my birthday and I would be turning 18, she would no longer be legally bound to maintain me. That means I would be on my own if I didn't share the fund. I realized at that point, I may have been kicked out for these folks by my own mother. To maintain harmony with her new family, she was prepared to discard her only child. It resembled a gut punch. Even though I could feel tears welling up in my eyes, I refused to cry in front of her. I told her, "Okay, I'll work things out if that's how you feel." She probably thought I would beg or plead with her, but I wasn't going to satisfy her. I left the room and entered my own right away. I was unable to think clearly because I was so upset and furious. I couldn't stop mentally reliving the exchange and wondering how things got so out of hand. I texted my buddies the remainder of the night to let them know what had happened. Really, I had no idea what else to do. I thought I was stuck and had no other options, but one of my friends was really quite helpful. She offered for me to crash with her for a bit if necessary. We might be able to share a room when the time comes, because another acquaintance mentioned that they knew someone who was also looking for a roommate for college. At least I had some friends who cared, even though it felt like the walls were closing in. I wasn't alone at all, at least. Even yet, it still ached to know that my mother would pick them over me. It seemed as though everything I had assumed to be true about her was false, and now that my entire world had turned upside down, I was left trying to figure out how to proceed. Things became tense after my mom and I had that meltdown. As in really tense. Every day I felt like I was treading carefully. There was always a shift in energy when I entered a room. Although my mother didn't say much to me, when she did, it was in a tone that was icy and almost mechanical. I think she was attempting to instill guilt or shame in me, but by then I was too furious to give it any thought. After a few days, I felt as though I was not there in my own home. Talking to my stepdad and step-siblings, my mother would act as though nothing had happened and that everything was okay. They would chuckle and discuss their plans for the weekend schoolwork and other things. And me? It was hard to ignore how they simply pretended that I wasn't even there as I would sit there eating my cereal. I suppose I had become accustomed to feeling alienated, but this time seemed different. They all seemed to be purposefully avoiding me, as if they were all complicit in it. I was in my room trying to think of anything to do much of the time. The clock was ticking and my birthday was quickly approaching. I was aware that my mom could legally throw me out as soon as I turned 18. And by the way she'd been acting, she meant business when she made her threat. Gradually, I packed up my belongings, attempting to get ready for whatever lay ahead. Packing my life into boxes felt like a strange dream, while everyone else downstairs continued as if nothing had happened. My mother finally addressed me again one night. When I answered my door after she knocked, she was standing there with her arms crossed, appearing worn out and irritated. "Have you given what I said any thought?" she asked, as if she knew right away that I would get her the response she desired. "Yes, I've given it some thought, but I'm not altering my mind," I informed her. She gave me an expression of utter incredulity. She seemed to be in disbelief that I was genuinely maintaining my ground. What, though, was she expecting? I wasn't going to give up the only thing I had left over from my dad to please her and her new family. With a sigh, she rubbed her forehead as if she were suffering from a headache. "It was a classic of hers, she said. "I'm really stressed out. You leave me with no choice if this is how obstinate you really are going to be." This time she didn't yell. It was worse somehow because she was so composed. She informed me that I had one weak point, the ability to change my mind or look for another place to reside. She said, "This isn't a threat. This is just how it has to be," as if she were the sensible one. My stomach dropped. Her tone was so casual and matter-of-fact that it felt almost too real. Sincerely, what was I supposed to say? So I just nodded. I was not going to change my mind, and I was not going to beg. I was aware that she had already made up her mind, and there was no turning back. Neither of us was going to give up even though we were at a standstill. Following her departure from my room, I just sat there for a long time, attempting to take it all in. At the same time as I felt as though my world was falling apart, I was just numb. It's strange to simply cease feeling anything after being furious for a very long time. It was as though I was witnessing all of this happen to someone else, not myself. At that point, I made the decision to leave no matter what. It was obvious I couldn't stay there any longer if my own mother was ready to throw me out for it. I contacted a couple of buddies and told them the entire tale. Admitting what was happening was embarrassing, but I was at a loss for what to do. I had to find somewhere to live till the start of college. Thank goodness for my incredible buddies. Sarah, one of my closest friends, offered to let me stay with her for however long I needed. Her mother even volunteered to assist me with devising a strategy. Knowing I had somewhere to go was relieving, but it was also a wake-up call. It was indeed happening like this. There was no turning back. My own mother was going to throw me out. The days that followed were a haze. I began boxing up the remaining items I owned, including books, clothes, and everything else that might fit. Though there was a strange sensation of freedom, I felt like I was racing against the clock. Yes, comma. It was unfortunate that I was being ejected, but at least I could choose where I was going to go next. At last I could stop acting like I belonged to a family that rejected me. My stepdad and step-siblings remained mute throughout this entire period. They were aware of the situation. They must have heard from my mom because they said nothing to me. They all seemed to be waiting for me to vanish. They must have thought I would simply walk out without causing a stir. A part of me wanted to confront them for their treatment of me over the years. What, though, was the point? Nothing would change as a result. They would continue to act as though I had never existed. My mother entered the room as I was packing my books one morning. "You know, you're making this harder than it needs to be," she said after observing me for a while. I simply carried on packing. I knew that if I looked at her, I would lose my temper, so I avoided eye contact. She continued by saying that it broke her heart to watch her give up her life for something as trivial as money. That really infuriated me slightly. All of this was what my father had left me. Though I knew it wouldn't matter, I wanted to scream at her, telling her how ridiculous it was that she was picking them over me. I just mentioned that. "You know this isn't about the money." She shrugged her eyes at me as if I were exaggerating. Okay, comma, if that is your preferred interpretation. However, you're doing a mistake and you'll regret it later. After that, she turned to leave. An overwhelming sensation of despair and rage washed over me. It was as though everything I had been suppressing for years sprang to the surface. But I continued packing without giving up. I refused to show her how painful it was. She had already demonstrated to me her priorities, so there was no need to act as though nothing had changed. It was obvious that no one else was going to take care of me, so I had to take care of myself. I was prepared with everything packed and ready to depart the day before my birthday. Sarah and her mother came over to assist me with packing up everything. It was both strange and relieving to feel as though I was fleeing. I realized that my only chance of ever being free from all of this was to leave. When we left, my mom didn't even come out to say goodbye. I recall taking one last glance at the house and half expecting her to answer the door, but she never did. It was simply deserted. I understood then that leaving wouldn't be the end of the world. It was a fresh beginning. I still had my friends, college aspirations, and my own future in front of me. Leaving stung, but I knew leaving was better than continuing to live somewhere I was never really welcome. After packing my belongings, I departed from the house and took up residence with my friend Sarah and her family. That was strange, you know. I had a wide range of feelings, including a great deal of rage, despair, and relief. Mostly, though, I just felt worn out, weary of conflict. I was sick of having to justify my value in my own home, weary of all that. However, departing seemed like the proper decision at the same moment. Even though it hurt a ton. Sarah had a fantastic family. I didn't feel like a burden or like a helpless victim from them. They greeted me warmly. Not a single question was raised. When I showed up, her mother gave me this huge hug. Furthermore, it was the first time I had felt like someone genuinely cared in a long time. Although I'm not the hugging kind of person, I believe I needed that more than I knew. Being there was a significant shift. Everything seemed to be going by quickly. I had to adjust to living without a personal space, taking up Sarah's room and returning to a regular schedule. I had to get used to a totally new life after getting tossed out of my own house. However, as absurd as that may sound, it was also quite liberating. I no longer had to feel like the odd one out or tread carefully. I could just be here. The strangest thing was how quiet my mom and I became in the initial days after my departure. She didn't get back to me, not a single text or call. I seemed to have disappeared from her mind. While I was relieved, I couldn't help but keep checking my phone in the hopes that she would say something. Anything at all. I realized that's ridiculous, but I guess I was still hoping she would get in touch with me, say she was sorry, and clarify that she didn't mean it. However, she didn't. I kept telling myself that this was the best option. She was no longer berating me or attempting to put me under duress, at least. But as the days passed, it seemed like further evidence that she didn't give a damn. She actually gave them the benefit of the doubt, and now that I was gone, she didn't even think to see how I was doing. However, a week or so after I'd moved out, I did receive a note. When I saw her name appear on my phone, my stomach gave me a strange, unsettling flip. For a split second, I believed she could be trying to make amends, but no. She texted me a long message threatening to throw everything away until I returned and got the rest of my belongings. No such thing existed. What's up with you? Or, I apologize. Just business. Simply chilly. In response, I said that I would pick up my belongings and that she didn't have to be present. I most definitely didn't want to see her, and I didn't want another argument. If her only plan was to tell me how self-centered I was. She assured me it would be okay, and said she would leave my belongings in the garage for me to get. The place had a distinct vibe when I arrived to get my belongings. It felt, for lack of a better word, emptier and colder. I felt like nothing more than a pile of trash that she was discarding because everything I owned was jammed into these cheap trash bags. I hauled the things into Sarah's car, fighting back tears. It was one of those times when everything kind of strikes you over the head at once and you realize, wow, this is my life right now. The true gut punch, though, came when I realized that Emma had already been granted my room by her. When I saw her belongings strewn all over the bed that used to be mine, I became aware of it. She was doing all the renovating, including hanging new posters. I felt as though I had vanished, as if I had never been there at all. I said nothing to her, and she said nothing back to me. She only turned to face me with a quick glance before returning to her task. I felt more alone than ever when I left that place, but I also experienced a strange sense of closure. I thought, all right, this is it. It is now what it is. I should move on since they have. I placed the bags in the room's corner when I got back to Sarah's house and just sat there, staring at the bags for a long. I was unable to get myself to unpack. I didn't feel like I was ready to accept everything that had happened, even though unpacking seemed to entail that. But Sarah didn't press me. She's such a great friend. She merely sat next to me. talked about unrelated topics to divert my attention, and, in the end, persuaded me to go out for takeaway with her over the following few days. Things began to improve. I was able to get back into a routine and felt like I belonged with Sarah's family. Her mother even assisted me in beginning my search for a part-time work, so I could start saving money for my ultimate independent move out. Although it was nice to have friends who genuinely supported me, the drama had not yet ended. My mother once dropped by Sarah's place. I was studying when I heard Sarah's mother calling from downstairs. I knew this wasn't going to go well the instant I saw my mother standing there. Her expression conveyed a combination of determination and anger. She insisted on speaking with me, and before I could reply, she became agitated over a social media post I had made. I created nearly everything. How I was expelled by her. How I never felt like I belonged in the family at all. It attracted a lot of attention, and it seems that some of her friends saw it as well. She was enraged. She yelled, "You have to take that down. You're unfairly portraying me in a negative light." My blood began to boil. "Okay," I fired back. "You recall that I was tossed out? You're upset because others know she didn't want to hear it, even though you chose them over me." She would not stop talking about how I was making her life worse and that I was to blame for her losing friends as a result of this. She even had the audacity to call me theatrical and immature for publishing it. I was done by then. I told her to go since I wasn't going to be taking anything down. I had support from Sarah's mother, who threatened to call the police if Sarah continued to rant. "You'll regret this one day when they're all gone, and you have no one left," my mother said before storming off. "Don't slink back toward me. That one ached. However, I didn't back down. I watched her walk away. I knew I had to let her go, even though it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I couldn't pursue someone who didn't want me in their life any longer. After that, it took me some time to get comfortable. My head was spinning from what she had spoken, and I was trembling. However, the presence of Sarah and her mother served as a reminder that I didn't require such individuals in my life. I was surrounded by true friends and support. Ultimately, it was one of the toughest things I've ever done to leave my mom's house. It was, however, the best decision I could have made. It made me face the truth of my circumstances and begin creating a new life free of all the negativity. Even though things are still difficult, and there are times when I long for the concept of a true family, I now understand that in certain cases the family you select is the one that matters most.